to change how the sport is looked at. I would argue that there's now a second and even a third wave about to launch of using data and analytics to change the sport, and I would argue that the impact is probably going to be greater on baseball operations than what's happened to date. Now, I don't pretend to be as good a storyteller as Michael Lewis, and I've never been mistaken for Brad Pitt, but I'll do my best to try and illuminate what's coming. Now, Sportvision, a company I'm honored to be a part of, is certainly no stranger to bringing innovation into sports. I'll show you a little clip of some of the things that we've brought into the sports world. Most of what you saw up there was actually what we reality. In other words, we take live video and overlay graphics on top of it to help illuminate what's going on in the game. And that's probably what we're best known for, although we consider ourselves a data. We track what are going on in sports, objects, baseballs pitched, NASCAR cars, whatever the case may be, and we take that data and try to turn it into content, broadcast. But when we look at, how do we innovate? What's going to be the next big thing? The same questions arise for us that happen in sports, right? So for instance, how are you going to spot the next great idea and evaluate? Spot the next great employee or great talent. This mic seems to be cutting in and out, so I'm going to switch to this. You can hear it just like this? Okay, all right. Who needs technology? All right. Projecting onto what's going to be the next great player is a really tough thing, right? It's an inexact science. Billy Beane himself was a fabulous so-called five-tool player who didn't make it at the next level. And so what happens is it becomes this sort of preserve, if you will, of folks who practice this alchemy and mad science of trying to figure out what's going to turn into a great player. Yeah. Does he have a good build? Does he have an attractive girlfriend? Those of you who watch the movie will appreciate some of those comments. But in the A's case, what happened is a great need impressed. There was a lot of inertia to how baseball is done and talent is picked, and it was really hard for Billy Beane to overcome it. But what happened was there was this enormous need. In other words, the team had no money and it had just been gutted of its best players. And so that did help, as it often does in the world. Great need, necessity is the mother of invention, overcame that inertia. So when we look at sports, how do we evaluate these things? How do we know what's going to become, the next great thing? And how do we foster it and overcome the inertia and all those sorts of things? There's a lot of inertia in sports. Well, we do the same thing that I think people do in business, right? We try to listen to our customers. We try and drive authority down in the organization. We try to fail fast. For instance, K-Zone was first an idea that was brought to us by a broadcaster, one of the executive producers at ESPN, and that led to, a great idea that turned into what became PitchFX. But the best, innovation we probably ever had came out of a mistake, frankly. That PitchFX system was a deal with Major League Baseball. We're installed in every stadium. We track every pitch. Lots of really great data comes out of it. Release point, spin, break, location, all sorts of things that we can, we did for television initially. But we thought, maybe we'll sell this to the teams as well. And we probably would have sold it to a few of them. A lot of them we probably wouldn't have. But what happened is it was published online to MLB at Bat, an application. And that application, turns out, didn't encrypt the data, mostly for speed reasons. But very smart people looked at that and said, hey, I think I can scrape this data and find, and build a database out of it. And that's exactly what they did. And they mined all this really valuable data and went to town on it. They did some amazing things with this data. And major league teams started to pay attention. These bloggers would get in there and start doing analysis on, could they predict injury with this data? Did the pitcher's release point drop, and is that indicative of injury? Or did it lead to greater success on certain pitches or failure or whatever? Anyhow, they did some great stuff, and the team started to pay attention, started hiring some of these bloggers to come on board and analyze this data. And in and of itself, that's not the worst thing for us, because we're like, hey, wait a sec, shouldn't everybody be paying for this data? It's not the worst thing in the world giving away, your valuable assets. I mean, Google proved that you can do it if you can take a slice of the ad revenue. Unfortunately, in our case, we gave away the data, and we gave it away commercial-free, which turns out to be less good of a model than Google had. But it wasn't a complete failure because these folks on the internet, just fans, got on and really proved the value of this data. So I think the next round, we really will have some eager customers for it, because now everybody has really grabbed onto this data. I think every team probably has analysts.
With identical deliveries and spins on Rivera's pitches, hitters are at a loss to identify and then attack the pitch until it is too late, and the balls end up in very different locations. Here are the nearly 1,300 pitches that Rivera threw in 2009, each frozen at the point when the batter must make his swing decisions. But with few clues to determine the pitch's ultimate location, the batter can be faced with guessing at these outcomes.
So that was a New York Times piece that ran online where they took our data on Mariano Rivera and showed you why he's so hard to hit. That's sort of how the lay people will look at it. Well, to give you a sense of how a team might look at this data, we're very fortunate that R.E. Kaplan, who I understand is not in this room, he said he was in the overflow room, was hired. He's one of the best analysts out there in baseball. He was hired by Tom Ricketts of the Cubs. So this is an analysis of Barry Zito. He is his release points plotted out. And he's got 3 or 4 pitches that look very similar coming out of his hand. If you think about that Mariano Rivera clip, you saw that pitches that look the same coming out of a hand can be hard to detect, except for those red dots, which happen to be his fastball. So, when the Cubs look at this data, the analysts can dig in and say, watch for his release point. If he drops it, you can detect that. Good batters will be able to detect that, and that's the fastball coming. And that obviously gives you a huge advantage if you're a batter. In the case of Brian Talent, somebody that the Cubs will see a number of times, pitcher for St. Louis, that's a ratio of the types of pitches that he throws, mostly a fastball pitcher. But you see towards the end of the season there in August, dramatically changed his mix of pitches, which also gives you an advantage. If you know to look for the changeup coming much more frequently, that will give you a big, big advantage. So lots of teams have adopted this. The Yankees have something like a dozen analysts now firing up at this. The smaller market teams, interestingly, have probably grabbed onto this more aggressively for the same reason the A's have, because they realize they need these advantages. I mean, the Rays, they got knocked out in the first round, but they made the playoffs, and they had a $40 million payroll. The Yankees are over $200 million. So, it really can be a competitive advantage. And we are about to launch, the next revolution here, and that's field effects, which is where, right now we're tracking every pitch that's thrown. Field effects is going to track everything, every player position, every ball that's thrown, every hit ball, and this is about 17,000 times more data than we have in the pitch effects. 2 terabytes of data a game, and there's about 2,400 games. So we're staring at it kind of wide-eyed, wondering how we're going to manage this much data, and so are the teams, by the way. But it will launch another revolution that should be interesting. The Red Sox themselves, Tom Tippett said it's the last frontier. All the work he's done over the years to try and measure defensive performance, which has been really hard to do, he said is going to be thrown out, and they're going to start over when this data hits the market. And to give you a sense of how valuable, it's sort of the question, what is the value of this? Can you measure that? Indeed you can. The bloggers did that as well. Each win for a competitive team can be worth $500,000 to $4 million if you're in a big market team, making the playoffs, season ticket sales next year, that sort of thing. So a good fielder can save you 10 to 30 runs over the course of the season. That's 1 to 3 wins. Yeah, you can get $10, $12 million of value by picking the right player, bringing him up if nobody else noticed that. So it can be very, very valuable. And just to give you a sense of an analysis that, again, a blogger did, he looked at Jason Bay. He doesn't position himself very well. He's known for being a little bit lazy about his positioning, but he is very, very fast. And so he'll cost you runs in his positioning, but he'll gain you runs in terms of being able to cover the ground. So anyhow, that's the type of analysis that we're doing. Question will come up, where does this go from here? I think the teams that, will probably all have to jump on board here and adopt this as it becomes more and more part of the culture. But it's not just the analytics, it's also entertainment. We're working on systems that let you, actually, we have it in NASCAR. We can let you race live in the NASCAR race through a video game engine. There's no reason. We're tracking those pitches live. We could let you be in the batter's box hitting the pitch live as it comes in. So some really fun stuff in sports. What we're seeing when data and augmented reality are applied to other areas, I've seen examples of heads-up displays on fighter pilots looking through the body of their plane to see the enemies that they can't, wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Firefighters being able to stare at buildings and see their colleagues inside the building, by using augmented reality and data tracking. And if I were here in a year or 5 years' time, hopefully either Sportvision or some other companies will be talking about doing stuff along those lines. So it's some really exciting stuff. I want to wrap up and leave a little bit of time for questions if I can. I don't think they gave too much time here. If we can, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes? 3D technology, you mean, yeah, so it's interesting. It presents some real problems to do sort of the augmented reality kinds of things that we do, right? Because it's a really tricky problem already, but now when you have two cameras to try and correlate, it's proving to be a difficult technological problem to do it. Fortunately, we made an initial bet early on to say, we're going to hold off a little bit. We weren't convinced that 3D was going to penetrate at the rate everybody thought it was going to be. And sports was one of the first to start to adopt it. And fortunately, that paid off. Because often when you're on the cutting edge like we are, we can spend a boatload trying to innovate things and pioneer them. And if it doesn't pan out to be a really valuable thing, then that's being on the bleeding edge. That isn't great for us. So we've held back. And technologies are getting better, and camera sensors are getting better, and so it makes it easier to do our job. So I think at some point we'll probably be doing 3D. What we're sort of interested in, a lot of people talk about, is the holographic image, right? Imagine seeing a football game projected onto your living room floor and little players, moving around on it. It's not as crazy as it sounds, actually. There's another question out there somewhere. Yes? Yeah.
I think the application that we're talking about, firing and all those other things are amazing for something we're working on. But I can remember I grew up in New York, New Jersey, and going to all the sports and playing the tickets, and it was just a good night out, a good time out, and it was very simple. And you went and enjoyed the sport. It didn't cost you a lot for a ticket, and you had a good time. And it seems like it's changed to this whole new dimension.
Yeah, I can't do anything about the ticket prices. But you sort of you bring up an interesting question is, on the graphics, because we sometimes get that, like, a little too much, right? A little too much. Like the pitch FX now, TBS will have it. If you have a high-def screen, it's in every pitch. ESPN this year put it in live in perspective on Sunday night games. And some people said, there's always be articles about this time of year. Is it too much? Is it, I like it, I don't like it, whatever. Our view of it is this, basically. We've learned through the years there's sort of three things that drive, a really good innovation. In sports, it happens to be, is it something that happens frequently? Is it important to the game? And is it hard to see? So if you think about the first down line, when you're at home watching it on television, you don't have the context, right? They'll zoom in on the runner, and he's running, and he dives forward. You can't really tell if he's there or not. It happens a lot, and it's really important to the game. So that's why that 1st and 10 is really powerful. The K-zone is the same thing, or pitch FX, because you're not looking at that dead center view. You're looking at it offset. It's actually hard to tell. A lot of times people say to us, you're clearly wrong on that. That was clearly a ball. And I'll say, no, you're clearly offset, and it's parallax that's letting you not get the misperception. But anyhow, there'll be articles. I guarantee you there'll be articles about, is it accurate, is it not? But we try and measure that because we don't want to overdo it either. We want to do it when it's valuable. Yes, right behind.
Are you guys building a club
Were you around in 1996, by the way? In China, okay. That's a great insight that you just had. That was the first product that the company had, not as Sportvision, but inside of News Corp. They got the rights to hockey, and we made the puck glow. Somewhat controversial, let's just say. Molson did a commercial up in Canada where a guy walks into his boss's office and says, "I've got a great idea." And the next thing you see is him being shot out of that office with the blue trail on his behind. Which was a knock, which was a shot at us because we put trails on the puck. All I can say is watch this space. We're talking to every sport about tracking everything that they do. Now, back in the day, no disrespect to Fox, our great partner, but they're not known for being subtle. So when we put that glow on the puck, it was red. If it was fast, it was blue. It was big. And we didn't know anything about graphics at the time either. It was the first time anybody had ever tracked and highlighted something live on television. So we were a little over the top. I think we do it better now, but I'd like to see that come back. Yes. Go ahead. Will the computer call balls and strikes? We get to ask that question too. My guess is, my personal feeling is no. Technology fails. It does. There are times when, actually, just this postseason, I won't tell you what stadium, but somebody, for the first time ever, sabotaged one of our cameras, put Vaseline over it, covered it. Our guys went up, we found out quickly, and they went up and cleaned it up, and then third inning, it happened again. Turns out it was one of the teams who thought the other team was stealing their signs. So, and sometimes computers fail, and my sense is you probably don't want to put yourself in that situation. There is an element of judgment to the sport, and frankly, I think there's some value in the umpires being able to, manage the players. Sometimes they'll call balls and strikes because of how they behave. That's part of baseball and baseball's tradition, right? I'm not opposed to that, and I would hate to see, technology actually get in the way of the game, which I think it can sometimes. The instant replay, I think, can be annoying. So I think you have to be really careful when you're going to start to use it for that. It's used as a metric in a lot of, it actually is used to evaluate the umpires after the fact. They go back, they audit the data to make sure everything was right and the strike zones were set right, and it is used to improve, umpire performance and help, train them as to, yes, this was a ball and no, it wasn't, and, so it is used for that. It's used for analytics. It's used for fan entertainment. It's, it is the number one, the at-bat app, which is not just our data, but our data is a big part of it, is the number one selling iTunes application of all time. So it does, get out there, and it is being used, I think, in many valuable ways. But I don't know if I want to replace the umpires.
So I had a question. I stole a microphone.
Okay. Wow.
Works better than yours, actually.
Okay.
One of the problems with 2 terabytes of data is that it's really hard to digest. And I think the brilliance behind some of the stuff that you guys do is that you make all that data usable, easily digestible, and ultimately more useful that way. And can you talk to me a little bit about how you guys go from taking all those data points and making them ultimately useful and simplifying them?
Yeah, well, in some cases you want to simplify them, like for digestion, quick, easy, visual digestion on a broadcast, right? And probably the best way we have of doing that really is truly listening to our clients, which are the producers, the directors, the networks themselves. They'll tell us pretty quickly, whether something works for them or doesn't work for them. Now, that can only go so far, right? Sometimes even the customers don't know, right? That old adage about, they would want faster horses. Henry Ford asked if he asked people what they wanted. But, and sometimes we'll see, the talent, so-called, the on-air talent, not wanting to use our stuff because it's a lot of data that they could use to talk about what's coming out, and they're just not comfortable with it. In that case, we just have to keep after it and find, the ones who will be the prophets. Finds the really, Oral Hershiser is great. He gets it, he's smart, he's analytical, he'll look at the data, he'll tell great stories about it, and then you can sort of use those examples to help sort of teach and proselytize to the others, for visual stuff. When it comes to just the raw, huge amounts of raw data, we're not going to put that on screen. You don't need to see a trail behind the guy running, but you might want to know that his ability to gain an extra foot on, a leadoff, led to the difference between being able to steal that second base, which led to the, getting home on the game-winning run. I mean, so there's ways that we have to find to make the data relevant and interesting without overwhelming it, but that's kind of an iterative process. Ari and those guys at the Cubs, they want all the data. Just give it to me and I'll figure out what I want to do with it. So.
Hey, I know we could go on for a lot of questions because this is what happens every time you come to an event. It's like it leads to a much longer conversation. It's great. It gets me thinking so much about like what the statistics, what the data adds to the game, and just the layers we haven't actually seen before. So, Hank, thanks so much for coming. That was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, great.
Thank you.